Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thanks for tuning in today and welcome to the Intern Group's Keynote Speaker Series. Any eagle-eyed viewers amongst you who've seen these before will realise that I'm not our regular host, Paul. I'm indeed Will, filling in as host today. And in the wings as talk coordinator, we have Manami. And again, for those of you who don't know, in this series, we speak with leaders in a variety of career fields over a whole multitude of different topics so that you can learn from their stories, tips and tricks, which will give you that cutting edge when applying for jobs and shed some light on the winding path that is, of course, your career. If you have any questions for our guests during the talk, please send them into Manami and state if you would like to read your question or if you would like to have it read out for you. The structure of today will be as follows. So we'll speak a little bit with our guest speaker, who I'll introduce very shortly. And then we'll move into a sort of Q&A session. And that's when we really invite you to send in any questions. And if we have time as well, afterwards, we'll move to breakout rooms and we'll have some short discussions between yourselves. Now, to introduce our guest today, excitingly, we have Anand S. Anand is the CEO of Gramina, a data science company. He leads a team that tells visual stories from data, is recognized as one of India's top 10 scientists, and is a regular TEDx speaker. So Anand, very welcome along today. How are you?
Very well, thanks, Will. Thanks for that introduction. It sounds a whole lot more flattering than when I think about it to myself.
Well, we've got to big you up somehow. No, it's great to have you with us. Pleasure. Really looking forward to hearing a bit about you. So, would you like to kind of tell the guests today a little bit about your story and then up until where you are today?
The topic is data storytelling. So there's got to be some storytelling in there. So I'll start with my story. And let's start with my educational background. I have a degree in chemical engineering, which is a bit unfortunate. And I managed to rectify that by never working a single day in the field of chemical engineering all of my life. But let me tell you how that came about. It's pretty much clear that I wanted to be a physicist, and I went over to the admissions at the Indian Institute of Technology at Madras, where they didn't quite have a specialization in physics in Madras, city where I was brought up and living in, but they did have some at Kanpur and Kharagpur, slightly far away, but I didn't have a problem with that. I knew what I wanted to study. So I made sure that I put in the ticks in the right place, and my rank would allow me to get that in case there's a tie. But unfortunately, my father, who was sitting next to me, he just pulled my sheet over. He said, well, and took out an eraser, knocked off anything outside of Chennai and said, look, you're not traveling anywhere outside the city. Feel free to pick what you want within the city. So I said, okay, great. So now I've got a second list in which I ticked everything in within the city, with the exception of chemical engineering, because I know that I don't know what else I'd like, but I know I wouldn't like chemical engineering. So I put that in. At which point, the professor who was counseling us looked at me and looked at my sheet of paper and said, you don't seem to have a tick in chemical engineering. I said, yes, that's something I don't like. He said, no, you like it. Sorry, what? Go ahead. I said, okay, put a check against that. And that's exactly where I ended up. Took me 4 years to correct that mistake, but I did eventually and ran off into IBM and into a software job, and which led me on to my passion later on, which was data, really. I'll talk a bit about that as well. But that eventually led me to found a data science company, Gramina. That's the organization I run right now. And this is what I've been doing over the last 10 years. And it's also the most important thing in my life today. At the moment, I'm in Bangalore. I've been married for the last 19 years to a wife who understands me well enough that if she wants to knock on the door here, she'd better make an appointment, or else, well, I'm in trouble. And my daughter, who's 15, who's responsible for both my major addictions. The first of which is playing Minecraft, which I do incessantly, sometimes even during meetings. And the other is reading Calvin and Hobbes, which is in fact such an obsession that I spent 6 years of my life typing out the script of every single Calvin and Hobbes comic strip that there ever exists. And to the best of my knowledge, I'm the only one who has it. I mean, other than whom I've shared it with, which is incidentally the thing that I'm most proud of in my life. But leaving that personal introduction aside, let's talk about data storytelling, which is kind of what I was going to talk to you about today and how that came about, which I'll talk about again in the context of how I came into data storytelling. So before I wanted to be a physicist, this was when I was really young, and I was reading Enid Blyton and the famous Five and the Five Find Outers were my favorite book series. I was pretty clear at that time too on what I wanted to be, which was a detective. And it's the coolest thing, right? You find out crazy stuff in by just with a magnifying glass and hunting. That vanished, and then I just grew up. But at some level, it's something that's always got my attention. Just solving puzzles. What does it take to find something interesting? And the first time that I did that with data was when I was in London working with a large retailer. Well, this is a long time ago, so I can give you more of the details around the story, if not the name of the retailer. But so I was working with this retailer, and we were looking at their data on Google Analytics, effectively looking at who visits the store online. And in the process, there were a few things that came out as reasonably useful facts. Like, for example, there were some brands that people were browsing, but were just not making any sales, which is strange, right? Why would somebody search for a particular brand? In this case, Cherokee. And there were 2040 odd searches for Cherokee every single day. 0 purchases. So is it out of stock? We checked. No, it's not out of stock. Is it because, I don't know, something wrong with the styling, something wrong with the pricing? No, it seemed all right. So we were kind of puzzled about this for a couple of days until one of the project managers who tried the same thing at home came back very excited the next day saying, guys, do you know something? What? We forgot to turn on the summer switch. Turns out that they have this internal switch in the software that moves from the summer line of clothing to winter line of clothing and vice versa. And it was summer. Somebody had forgotten to turn off that flag, turn on the flag, whatever. And it was still showing winter clothing in summer. So all of these people who were outside the organization, outside the firewall, were looking at something very different from what was being seen inside the organization. And inside the organization, we just couldn't figure out why people were searching for it and not finding something which clearly they weren't outside, which got me excited. I said, okay, fine. That's kind of like a detective, right? That's like, well, I mean, not, Five Find Outers scale where they're solving some major mystery, but this was a mystery. Not bad. So I plowed ahead and explored that data a little more. And there was another thing that was unusual. See, websites send traffic to any website, and these are called referrals. And it's pretty important for any retailer to know where their referrals are coming from. Many of them are paid referrals. So actually, if there are conversions, they pay out a small referral fee to them. So one of the things that I was exploring was who are the people that are sending in traffic, but people are not buying despite that. Who are the worst referrals? Now, this is a British retailer, right? So I was pretty surprised when the number one site that was sending in a lot of traffic but was not converting was zakazeng.at.ua. That's in Ukraine. mama.kharkov.ua. Again, clearly not anywhere in British Isles. vcontact.ru, something else in Latvia, and a whole bunch of countries from the former Soviet Union. Why are people in the former Soviet Union buying stuff off of a British retailer? Made no sense. And I clicked on those links, went to the site. It was in Russian. This was pre the ubiquitousness of Google Translate. So Me and a colleague, we went over to a lady who spoke Russian and said, "Can you help us?" And she said, "Yeah, sure." And she set up some time and she went back and came over the next day, by which point we were all huddled around, and a few other team members were also pretty curious on what she had found. She came in, she smiled very sweetly and said, "You guys are in the middle of a Russian mafia smuggling operation." Sorry, what? So it turns out that a whole bunch of these websites, they buy stuff from the UK, smuggle it into Russia without paying customs duty, set up their own sites. But instead of doing all of the work, they point back to the original retailer saying, "This is what you're going to get," and buy the stuff. Their legal team threw a fit. Okay, we've got to start putting in some restrictions. No more than so many items per basket, no more than blah, blah, blah. But then struck me, wait a second, I uncovered a smuggling ring. That's Kenneth Blitton worthy. And I was hooked. That's where I got into, well, a data detective, at least, trying to figure out what we can discover from data. That's unusual. That's crazy. And there are all kinds of things that you can find from data. Weird stuff. Let me show you my screen and talk through some interesting stuff. So one of the things we were looking at, for example, is when are people born, right? Is there a uniform distribution across the year? I mean, are birthdays spread out smoothly, or is there a pattern to it? So we took about 15 years worth of US birth data from 1975 to 1990 and plotted that from the first of the month to the end of the month, from January to December. And the darker the cell, the more people are born on that day. Now, you can see a few things. First is that there are a large number of births in particularly the second half of September. This incidentally is a well-known phenomenon. It even has a name. They're called winter babies. See, a lot of the conceptions happen during the winter holiday seasons, and 9 months later is when the kids are born. That happens to be a known thing, except not known to me. But this is unusual. There are surprisingly few births during the Christmas holidays, surprisingly few births during the Thanksgiving holidays, very few births during the New Year holidays. In fact, very few births during the Independence Day holidays. I mean, this half reads like a holiday calendar, not a birth calendar. Right? Where's that coming from? But again, it has a reasonable explanation. I mean, this is 1975 to 1990, fairly high proportion of C-section births. And if that's happening, then the doctors and the hospitals need to be fully staffed, which means that if it's during the holiday times, and there's a certain amount of flexibility to move the dates around a little bit, the doctors are going to prefer something where the hospital is a little more staffed. They've got enough people, right? So yeah, let's move the births around a little bit before, after the holidays. But let's not blame just the doctors or the hospitals. Parents do that too. You notice the 13th of every month has fewer births? Yeah, not lucky for a kid to be born on the 13th. So let's move that around. You don't want your kid to be born on April Fool's Day either. April the 1st isn't such a perfect day to have a kid. But Feb 14th, Valentine's Day, yeah, let's have kids on Valentine's Day. That's a good day for a kid to be born on, right? So now this is incredible, because what we are looking at is the preference of an entire population, an entire nation, simply by looking at one number: when, where people born. And this completely varies from country to country. It's very cultural, because if you want to look at the pattern in India, right, this is what it looks like. What the heck is this? So firstly, a huge number of births in the first half of June and second half of May. Okay? Very few births in the month of August. And we'll talk a bit more about some of the patterns that you see here. But when I showed this first to a newspaper editor, he said, "Oh, you know, there are several strong astrological properties of the month of, in August, it's inauspicious." Wait, what? So as you have guessed, I'm not too much into astrology. It might work, might not work, I don't know. But and this actually had a cleaner explanation. First thing I must share is where I got this data from. So this is school admission data. for 10 million children over, I don't know how many years, but over a few years. And the thing about school admission in India is that a child has to be 6 years old at the time when schools open, which is typically mid to end July. And if a child's not 6 years old at that time, then come back the next year. Now, parents have a couple of options. One, wait for, if the child, say August born, wait for 11 months. That's fair. But here's the thing, for a large number of schools, the only record that, I mean, the date of birth as per the school records is the official record, not the birth record. So what's their source of data on when the child's born? The date that the parents declare. As a parent, I have two choices. Option A, wait for 11 months with a noisy kid at home, or worse yet, delaying their education in the race of life where they might fall behind by 11 months, or fudge the dates a little bit. Now, I'm not saying the dates are fudged just because there's a huge number of births in the second half of May, or in May or first half of June, which is typically when schools start reopening. Notice these stripes on the 5th, the 10th, the 15th, the 20th, and the 25th of every month. It's a whole lot easier to cook up round numbers than it is to cook up something unusual like the 17th of the month. Yeah, just say 5th of the previous month. A true story. My dad's official birthday is June the 15th. His actual birthday is December the 25th. Why June the 15th? It'll get him into school. And the 15th is, yeah, nice round number. The 1st also, I'll come to that. June the 1st is in fact the single most common birthday in India, according to official records. It's even more common than January the 1st. Now, Jan the 1st has a reason. If the child or the parent doesn't know the exact date of birth, the government mandate is put in the year, which you can guess, and the 1st of Jan. So fair, there's a large number of births on the 1st of Jan, at least according to the school records, which are the official records. But June the 1st, that's actually primarily an urban phenomenon, with the parents wanting to get their kids into school early. That's what makes this so much more powerful. But the thing is, the impact of this is tremendous. If you overlay the marks of children who are born on these dates, that's what you get. Firstly, I'll ask you to ignore the dark reds. These are actually missing dates. I mean, there is no February 30th or 31st. But leaving that aside, the redder the cell is, the lower the marks, and the greener the cell is, the higher the marks. And first off, you'll see that children who say they are born on the 1st, the 5th, the 10th, the 15th, the 20th, the 25th, especially around the time of school admission, they score much lower. These are younger kids who've been brought into a class with older kids, and they suffer from that age disadvantage to the point where 12 years later, there's a 10 percentage point difference between the youngest and the oldest in the class. It's huge. In fact, June the 1st is also the date on which, on average, the marks are the lowest. It's stunning. This is just the beginning of what we can do with data. I talked about retail, I talked about education, I could go on into politics, I could go on into sociology, I could go on into business, I could go on into science. There's almost no place where you can't tell an interesting, an amazing story just by looking at data carefully. That's effectively what me and my organization do. Just try and find these stories all over the place. But that was just a teaser to give you a sense of what can be done with data. Let's talk. I'd love to hear what you're curious about, and we'll take it from there.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Anand. That was super, super interesting looking at those births there. And I actually just had a quick question off the back of that. And you mentioned to do with how you can use data science and analytics in politics. I noticed that you shared something to do with gerrymandering and the use of that in politics. I appreciate you could maybe talk about it for hours. Do you think you could just briefly explain for people what that is and how it's used?
Okay, so that politics can be dirty business is not going to be surprising to anyone. But that you can do some really, really clever stuff that to, well, someone not particularly, pious or moral. I mean, it's a delight, right? The whole point in politics is to break the boundaries. So let me share some of the ways in which people do that we've seen. So let me, in fact, share a few visuals on that. I'm going to locate something that we did. Yeah, let's start with that. I'm going to share my screen again. Right. So one of the things we were playing around with is, where did the largest number of candidates stand for elections? This was particularly for the state elections, the state of Tamil Nadu. In the year 1967, and I'll show you the details for 1971, 1967, and so on, each of these circles represents one constituency. So that's a constituency called Perambalur, where there were 10 candidates standing for a single position, which is to be the member of the Legislative Assembly of Tamil Nadu. And each of these are color coded based on which party eventually won. So the party in blue got a reasonable number of seats, but you can see that the party in yellow got the largest number of seats. And the size of the bubble represents the number of people that stood for elections in that particular constituency. Now, out here we have just 3 candidates standing for election. Now, not that it makes that much of a difference how many candidates stand for an election. Ultimately, there are a few popular candidates, they are likely to win, right? But let's look at the ways in which just the number of candidates standing for an election in a constituency can lead to some of the insights in the way people think. So this is how it was in 1967. So one constituency had a large number of candidates driven mostly by the independents. IND stands for independence. And otherwise, nothing particularly stunning stands out. Let's go to the next year. Again, nothing quite stands out other than the fact that now it's almost a clean sweep by the yellow party. Okay, fine, fair enough. Now, 2 things have happened. Firstly, the circles have grown a bit bigger. That means there are more people standing for election. And the color has changed to a new color, maroon. And that's a new party that came in and swept into power. So understandably, the increase in size is justified, right? There's one more party, so there's at least one new candidate standing for elections in each of these constituencies, and that's gently pumped up things a bit, but nothing odd so far. 1980, again, nothing unusual or interesting. 1984, now suddenly we have one constituency where there are 90 candidates standing for elections. Now, imagine if you had to vote, had to pick one among 90 candidates, right? It certainly wouldn't fit on one sheet. So you have to, I don't know, let's say 10 people per sheet. So it will across 9 pages, find your candidate and vote for that person. We had no idea why 90 people, mostly independents, would decide to contest for this one constituency. But the mystery doesn't end there. 1989 was unusual in that there were a large number of candidates in several constituencies. Even more unusual was 1991, where 264 candidates and 249 candidates decided to stand for elections, again, mostly independents, in 2 constituencies. No idea why. But all of this, before I remember, 250 candidates, now you have to flip through a mini booklet to find the candidate that you want to vote for, right? It's becoming heavy. But all of this pales in comparison to the 1996 elections at Modakuruchi, where 1,033 candidates were standing for election in the same constituency. And if you look at the names, right? I mean, this is probably the telephone directory of Modakuruchi. Some of these names are, yes, Palanisamy C, Palanisamy C, Palanisamy C, Palanisamy D, Palanisamy K, Palanisamy K, Palanisamy K. I mean, if you're a Palanisamy K, how do you know which Palanisamy K you are to vote for yourself? Which actually seems to have been a problem because there were as many as 88 candidates who got 0 votes, meaning they stood for the election but didn't even vote for themselves. That's the only way you can get 0 votes. How crazy is that? So this, we went behind, said, what's happening here? It turned out that people started using elections as a mechanism of protests. So at Modakuruchi, the Farmers Union sat in front of the Election Commission office literally caught the passerbys, gave them the 500 rupees that it takes to contest. That was a pretty low sum given inflation, even at that point, and said, go and sign up. And well, if you want to vote for yourself. And that kind of protest happened in a number of other places. But it was odd to see that it wasn't just the vote itself, but even who contests could be a source of making a political statement. But this is bottom up. This is where people are saying, I'm not particularly happy with the way the political governance process is run. What about the other way? How are parties gaming the system? Well, let's see. Not this one. Was it this one? Yeah, just give me a second. I'm trying to locate where we found the stats. Okay, yeah. So one of the things that we were exploring was, are there places where there are two people with the same name? We saw in the last one that there were a dozen people with the same name, but that's because that's a dozen out of 1,000. But usually you have fewer than 10 people contesting, often fewer than 5 people contesting, and there the chances of a duplicate name, that's pretty low. But it turned out that in the 2014 elections, something very unusual happened. In one of the constituencies, Mahasamund, there were 11 candidates whose name was exactly Chandu Lal Sahu. 11 people, same name, out of probably some 15 people who stood for the elections. 5 people named Lakhan Lal Sahu. 3 people named Jarnail Singh, and so on. A huge number of constituencies, something that was never seen before. What was happening here? Firstly, all of these were the sitting MPs, meaning there was one candidate who was actually an MP. And in the case of Mahasamund, there were 10 other candidates who were not the MP, who had the same name. And clearly, it was an attempt by an opposition party to confuse the audience by, well, having multiple candidates with exactly the same name, which is, yeah. The other question is, does it work? And I'll come to that in just a bit. Some of these, so Hema Malini, for instance, is a popular actress, or at least one of them was a popular actress. The other clearly was not. And the list of parties that were affected by it notoriously excluded the Congress, which was the party, which was the otherwise dominant party and the main party in opposition. So clearly a Congress tactic to get people to register as independents with the same name. Which, did it work? No, it didn't. There wasn't a single constituency where a candidate with the duplicate name, where a candidate having the duplicate name won. And which is kind of understandable because most people vote based on the party symbol or even the party name rather than the candidate. So that kind of explains it. But the other question is, did this have an impact on the margin? Did it actually reduce the vote share any? So, oddly enough, it did. And while it wasn't a tactic that worked in its entirety, it was a tactic that did have an impact and the vote share did diminish. So that's one of the things that you can discover in interesting ways from politics. Now, you were talking about gerrymandering, Will, and let me talk a little bit about that. So, let me just show you how this works. So let's say there are draw a constituency. So let's say that's one constituency. And let's say that we split it into 2 parts. Let's select these shapes and fragment it. And yeah. So now I have the right side and the left side, both parts of the same constituency. Now, let's say this constituency was created in 1960 and both constituencies have roughly the same number of people. But over time, this constituency, which let's say has a city, has grown in population. And now you have a few more people here, but not entirely. This, yeah, okay. So this part of the constituency has grown and certainly has a lot of people. And over time, the regions become polarized. The metropolitan region, they start saying, look, I actually want to work for the blue party. While this region doesn't have that many people and they say they want to vote for they want to continue voting for the yellow party. This region strengthens in terms of population, becomes bigger and bigger, and eventually has a lot of people that happen to be supporting the blue party. And this is a region that has very few people and are supporting the yellow party. When you put it together, the votes are all going to go to the blue party, and the blue party is going to win because there are a lot more people. Now, the yellow party doesn't like that, and the yellow party is in power. So what would the yellow party do? They'd say, well, look, I have a neighboring constituency, and that's what this looks like. Let's draw the neighboring constituency slightly better. Let's draw it a bit more neatly. Why am I never able to complete my circle? That's the neighboring constituency, and from this, let me subtract this constituency, this minus this. And for some of you who don't know that PowerPoint could do this, yeah, here's something new for you to learn. But right, so let's get rid of this constituency. Oh, that didn't, okay. Let's copy this and paste this here, fine. So now this neighboring constituency is actually just a marginal towards the blue party, and the party in power doesn't quite like it. But it turns out that if this could be combined with this, they actually would win. So what they'd say is, look, this constituency, the original constituency that we had, has too many people. And we can't have this constituency as just one whole. What we'll do is we're going to split it. And because this constituency, and we're going to split it into two parts. And the way we're going to split it is along this boundary, not along this boundary. So all the blue will go to one side. All the yellows will come to the other side. And we're going to take this constituency, which has very few people, this part of the constituency, which has very few people, and this part, which has very few people, and we're going to combine them. Now, when this gets combined, these marginal yellow votes get added to the marginal blue votes. And that, for this constituency, gives a reasonable chance of actually winning and coming to power. So where earlier they lost this by a slim margin and they lost this by a heavy margin, they're going to lose this by an even heavier margin, but actually win this because this is enough to turn the tide and make this whole thing orange. That's what gerrymandering is, where their constituencies' boundaries are redrawn so that some parties have more of an edge. I'll put it another way. Gerrymandering is inevitable, meaning when boundaries are redrawn, somebody always wins, somebody always loses, because there's always a non-uniform distribution in terms of support, even if it's by a few households, right? So invariably, there is gerrymandering in every single redistribution. It's unavoidable. The question is simply one of bargaining power and who has how much bargaining power. So sometimes it's not even politics, it's just redistribution. So yeah, there it is, Will.
Beautiful, thank you. And that's ties very well in with your data visualization piece, how you're able to do that off the fly and get a lot of data and show to people fairly simply, like what the concept of a problem is or a solution is, which is really cool. And I'm going to ask one last question, and we've got a few more flying in from interns. But yeah, so, and as we said, data visualization has become very prominent in a lot of businesses now. And as we've seen, you've explained its importance very well. What potential job roles are there in this area, and what skill sets are desirable for these lines of work?
Let's start with the first part, which is what kind of job roles are there for this, for data visualization in particular. There are two ways of looking at it. One is data visualization is literacy skill. And it's something that will help in pretty much every role. Let me give you some examples of that. Then I'll come to what kinds of roles exist for someone who wants to specialize in data visualization. In business, the single most common question that I'm asked when I talk about data is, how can we help people understand data better? I just got off a meeting with a large FMCG company, and they said the bulk of the time that we spend in our meetings is not at looking at the data and trying to figure out what decisions to make, but looking at the data and trying to figure out what the hell it's saying. It just doesn't make sense. Now, we took on a team member, an intern, who actually was pretty good at putting together presentations. Turns out that you give him a storyline, he's able to communicate that brilliantly. And all he does is picks up on the storyline, puts the title of what we want to communicate as the heading of the slide, has the contents of the slide prove the heading, and keeps it to one message per slide. If I had to explain his methodology in one paragraph or one sentence, that's it. That's what he does. And it works brilliantly. That's exactly what I've been doing most of my life. This has nothing to do with data. It's about communication. And because a significant portion of how we substantiate our communication is through data, it becomes important to know how to visualize data. So, in what roles could this be used? Anywhere where you're persuading people. That includes, let's take marketing, where you're communicating externally. Management, where you're often communicating internally. Sales, where you're absolutely trying to persuade people in some shape or form. HR, where your employees are your stakeholders or your management's your stakeholders, and you're looking to help them understand what the data means. Is my attrition number growing or is it shrinking? And the short answer is I can make it look whatever you want it to be by changing the scales. Accounting thrives on data. In the manufacturing space, if you're looking at production, we look constantly at, is production improving? Is the yield improving? Are our initiatives working? Ultimately, if you're making decisions, you need to consume data. If you're an exec, you need to be able to tell people, look, I know data can be presented better. Let me show you. And going forward, I need you to present it to me this way. If you're in middle management, you're in the function of doing both things. A, helping others consume the data, because you've got to persuade people, you've got to get your budget. And you've also got to ask your team to be able to present data better. If you're someone who's actually doing work, then maybe 20% of your time you will be called upon to persuade on why somebody needs to do something and substantiate it. That's where data visualization comes in hand. But data visualization is also a specialist role. Where is this role coming in which function? Well, almost every organization today has either a reporting function or a business intelligence function, or sometimes it's rolled into the IT function, and sometimes it's rolled into an analytics function. These can either be centralized. So let's take, say, an organization, let's say Nike. Nike may have a centralized analytics function. They may also have a marketing team who has a marketing analytics function, and every function would have its analytics functions. I use analytics in the broad sense. It could just as well be IT. It could just as well be business intelligence. It could just as well be reporting. But I'm going to use the word analytics to cover all of these broadly with any team that deals with data. Or it could be a regional team. So Nike in Hong Kong has its own analytics team, or Nike's marketing team in Hong Kong has its own analytics team. And the more granular it gets, the closer or the more fuzzy the gap between somebody who's purely doing data visualization versus purely doing regular work. If you find somebody with the role business analyst, invariably, they would be presenting data and would need to present data in that shape or form. But there are specialized roles. Data visualization expert is increasingly becoming a term. Someone who works on data visualization tools, the likes of, say, Tableau, Power BI, or programmatic tools like, let's say, libraries on top of a package like R, or a language like Python or JavaScript. There are several powerful libraries there. These, again, are roles for someone who wants to specialize a bit more on the technical side with regard to data visualization. So that was the long answer to the question, what kinds of roles? The short answer is anywhere on the management side, and certainly anywhere where you use the word analyst or reporting. On the skills part, what kind of skills are required? I'd put the skills into two buckets, tools and techniques. Of the two, techniques are more important. I'll come to that. I'll save the best for the last. But let's start with tools. What tool do you need to be familiar with? Excel and PowerPoint, honestly. Just be masters of these two tools because they're ubiquitous and they're powerful. Actually, there's only one tool that's more powerful than either of these. It's unfortunately very rarely used, but that's paper and pen. Seriously. You want to visualize something? Sketch it out. It works. Every other tool has limitations, constraints on what can be done, what can't be done. And short of being able to animate stuff, you can do everything on paper and pen. But that apart, increasingly popular tools are Power BI, Tableau. That's on the BI side. That apart, programmatically, you may want to get familiar with JavaScript as a language. The most popular data visualization library is D3, but increasingly people are moving towards another library called Vega, which is even more popular. And there are a whole bunch of charting libraries that you'll find out there on the internet. On Python, Matplotlib is the library that's the de facto standard. And on R, I guess it's ggplot2, that's the de facto standard. These you would need to know from a tooling perspective only if you are interested in actually getting into programming, which helps because you can create really powerful stuff and differentiate yourself. But if not, at least make sure you know someone who can do this stuff, because you can still differentiate yourself by having them do this work. Which brings us to the technique part. Now, here's the thing. It's less important to know how to do it than to know what to do. I'm sure you would have heard that pie charts are not such a great idea. Why is that? And is it always true? It turns out that that's not always true. There are two conditions under which a pie chart actually works better, which is A, the audience cares about aesthetics, and B, where you just are comparing a part to a whole. I have just two elements in the pie, the whole, out of which I'm looking at a part, in which case a pie chart works beautifully. In fact, if you put that in black and white, those are called Harvey balls. And the really powerful thing about Harvey balls is that you can create an array of these. I can say, here are my 30 products, here are my 20 divisions, and here's how each one of these products is faring against the divisions. And I have an array of these Harvey balls. They're like mini pie charts, and at a glance, I can see what's working well, what's not working. Which brings us to another technique, which is small multiples. Small multiples are where you take a chart and create a grid out of it, either a linear grid, row-wise, column-wise. And sometimes these can be condensed into a single cell in Excel, what are called micro charts, where you don't have to have an entire bar chart. You can just have the shape of the line, which will give you the trend, and put that into a cell and say, for this product, here's what the trend looks like. This product, here's what the trend looks like. And the whole thing can be condensed into a single chart. Now, these are actually fairly tool independent. And techniques like microcharting, techniques like small multiples, techniques like knowing when to use which chart, that's a whole different ballgame altogether. Where can you pick this up from? The quickest answer that I can give you is any book by Edward Tufte, Tufte. These books are old, they're classics, they're beautiful, and they're timeless. Pick up any book by Tufte and it'll be a beautiful journey into how you can visualize data. And then it's just a matter of applying your tools to be able to replicate those techniques.
Fantastic. Thanks for a very thorough but super interesting answer. I love the applications that you can use into real world business. It's great. I feel like I've definitely spoken enough, so I'd love to give pass the sort of mic over to a few interns, and I believe Charlotte has a question for you. Anand, Charlotte, are you there?
Hi, Charlotte.
Thank you so much for this presentation. My question is, can you share if you have observed or hypothesized any interesting data narratives in the COVID-19 era? Anything interesting you've observed or think that we're going to see in the data narrative?
We were just working on a course in which we were using COVID-19 data across the world to see a bunch of things, including how effective are vaccinations. And we found that wherever there are more vaccines, there's usually a breakout of more cases. Okay, that's not the message we want to send. Why could that be? Maybe because the vaccinations take some time. So let's work a little bit harder and see 1 week later, is there an increase in cases? 2 weeks later, is there an increase in cases? 3 weeks later, 4 weeks later? Short answer, nope. You vaccinate, the number of cases is higher 1 week later, 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, 4 weeks later. Okay, that's not a good sign. What else can we do? And we are yet to find a single piece of analysis that can show that vaccinations are actually reducing the number of cases. But here's the thing, right? Like with all kinds of data analysis, correlation is not causation. One way of thinking about it is you vaccinate in order to bring down the number of cases. The other way to think about it is you start vaccinating when the number of cases goes high, and therefore the risk of vaccination is low as well. And so far, world over, what we've been seeing is the reverse. Just people start vaccinating more when they find that the number of cases are increasing. So vaccination, by and large, is not the cause, but rather the effect of COVID, which is a very interesting perspective. We're being reactive, and this is the extent to which it's so. Bunch of other things, but this was, to me, I mean, we basically decided not to put any of this material in the course because, I mean, it kind of sends a very wrong message, and we are yet to find something that proves the hypothesis that we want. But which leads me to another very important message, which is what I'm just doing is a classic bias. I have a point of view that proving vaccinations as bad is a wrong thing to do, or at least sending that message out is a wrong thing to do. And providing proof that vaccinations are helpful in some way is what we need. Therefore, what I'm doing is eliminating all of the analysis and not publishing all of the analysis that contradicts my hypothesis. That's terrible because if I try hard enough, I will find a correlation, like the number of swimming pool deaths increase every time Nicolas Cage acts in a movie. That's a real correlation, by the way. But I'm sure that Nicolas Cage has nothing to do with those suicides in swimming pools. It's just that eventually, if you rule out all the stuff that you don't like, you'll find something that you like. This has happened in science. In 1900, Andrew Millikan performed an experiment to measure the charge of an electron. And because he used the density of oil as a value that was slightly lower, his value for the charge of the electron was slightly lower. It took about 15 years for subsequent experiments to correct this. And if you plot the results of those experiments across time from 1900 to 1915, you'll find that it doesn't jump, and that it's a smooth and steady rise all the way from 10% below to the actual value. Why? Because a scientist who does it after Millikan says, well, my value is a little bit higher than Millikan's. Maybe I got something wrong. Let me try again. And he tries again and says, oh, okay, yeah, that's kind of within the experimental error range of what Millikan got. So let me publish that, not the earlier result. And that keeps happening and happening and happening. So that's exactly the bias that I got into. Just keep that in mind. But on the COVID side, yeah, vaccinations are the effect, not the cause of reduction of the number of cases.
Great. Thanks, Anand. Thank you very much for your question, Charlotte. Yeah, interesting finding you saying about how you can basically cherry pick from the data and results to show what you want, basically. We have another great question here from an intern as well, and it is, what are the best avenues for beginners who want to enter the data science world? what would be a good starting point, especially because there are so many overwhelming options?
There are, my answer today is slightly different from what I'd have given a couple of years ago. Today, I'd say pick up any of the data science courses, and the advantage that you have is it gives you a foundation and it connects you with people who are looking for trained data scientists. The answer that I would have given a couple of years ago, I'll come to in just a bit. But at the moment, me clearly taking up a course, either in the likes of, say, Coursera or one of these, or even in a local college or any institute that's offering such a course, is actually a pretty good idea. Not that there's a huge, how should I say? I'm not saying this because the quality of content has improved in these courses dramatically or any such thing. In fact, I think the quality has a long way to go. But data science is now such a hot and such a sought after skill that people are flocking after any group of people that offer any kind of training on data science so that they get a pool of people to recruit from. It's as simple as that. So you just have an easy access to a career in data science because you're congregating into such a pool. But my earlier answer would have been practice analyzing data using personal data. What I mean by that is, look, you're surrounded by personal data. Your mobile phone is a fantastic source of being able to answer questions like, who do I call the most? It's not necessarily a trivial question. Who are my top 5 most called contacts? Or who are the people that I call, but who don't call me back? Who are the people that I email, but end up replying to me at least a week later? Who are the people that I rarely reply to? That's on the side of communication. Or let's take when I was purchasing a laptop, one of the things I did was downloaded the specifications of a few hundred laptops, looked at the memory, looked at the hard disk, looked at the size of the screen, a few other parameters, and looked at the price and tried to figure out what really determines the price. Which of these how much does, let's say, 100 megahertz increase in CPU speed matter to the price? How much does 1 GB of RAM matter to the price, and so on? Which allows me to make a more refined trade-off. I really want more RAM, but I'm not too fussed about the hard disk size. So I can trade off based on that. That's just personal preference. Or take flight tickets. I did a bit of exploring on flight tickets before I booked mine and found that at least for local flights in India, if you book 8 days in advance of the flight, that's when you end up on average getting the best prices. 7 days earlier, the price is invariably revised to something that's slightly higher, and you lose that window of opportunity. All of these are opportunities for just using data that's around you for a purpose that matters to you. It could be your music collection that you rate to try and see which are your most, which albums or which singers or music directors you like the most, or anything. The advantage is that you would be applying data science with a purpose that you truly understand. So you're not just learning what to do, but you know why you're doing it. And that's one of the things that's really missing from any kind of formal education, where you're taught how to do stuff, but you're rarely told why you do what you do and what to pick when you do something. So even if you're taking a course, I'd strongly just advise you to use some kind of personal data and explore by yourself.
I love that. The personal element to understanding your growth is great. And I know we're getting a little bit short on time. You've been very gracious with your time, Anand, but I do know you have a hard stop in 5 minutes. So I've got one last one that's come in here from an intern. And what are some useful data science tips and tricks that you could give to some of us non-tech people, I think is the...
There are, let me share a few. Actually, well, let's share a couple that are pretty cool. One of the things I find is that Excel is a highly underused tool. So let me show you how you can do some cool data science in Excel. So it turns out that there is this add-in, and you can get add-ins in Excel, called Azure Machine Learning, which comes from Microsoft. And when you put that in, what it does is a whole bunch of things. But one of those services is called text sentiment analysis. So supposing you have some employee survey data where the, let's say, response from the employee, let me type this in, response is something like, I love this company. I think it sucks. Okay, a bit good, bit bad, some such thing. And you've got thousands and thousands of these. You want to know, look, on the whole, do people like it or not? And then I want to look at it by department, HR, marketing, sales. What does each department think? Now, what I'd love to have is a number, a sentiment that can tell me if people like this or not. So what I do is choose the input range, which in this case is this set, and my data has headers, and I want to put in the output out here and include the headers and make a prediction, which I click on it. Worked. Oh, sorry, I'm supposed to put in the cell number, so that's C1, and then predict. So that's doing its, well, whatever it's doing, and it's saying something or the other, which did not happen. That's the trouble with these live demos, right? I don't know. Okay, column names must match schema. Okay, fine. Let's say my data doesn't have headers. Start with B2 and just put my stuff out here, and I don't have headers. Just on this. Any better luck? Yeah. Okay, fine. I don't know why it's got one extra. B2, 3, and 4. Okay, I don't know where it got this from. But, oh, okay. Okay, fine. It just said response is positive. Let's ignore that. So it's saying that's a positive response, that's a negative response, that's a positive response, and these are the degrees of the degree of confidence that it has on this. So it's like an 86% response. This is a 23% response, which is less than half, and therefore bad. This is a 69% response. It's slightly positive. Bit good, bit bad. I think it's saying on the margin, I think of it as positive. Now you can conclude that marketing on the whole doesn't like the company. HR does like the company a lot, and sales is marginally on the positive side, and you can do that by averaging across 100 such stuff. Text is a heavily underused area. So if there was one really quick thing that you can get benefits out of, it's by looking at text and seeing if you can get insights from
it. That's great. And yeah, there's definitely something that people can use on the day-to-day, and if in your internships and stuff, I'm sure if you're able to utilize anything like that, then you'll definitely shine. Anand, it's been great to have you with us today. As I said, I do know that you have a hard stop, but yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us and everyone on the call. Apologies for any questions that we didn't get around to answering, but yeah, we'll follow up this talk with link to recordings and discussion points, the keynotes, and Anand's recommendations and tips and tricks. And actually, Anand, like I said, I know you have to drop, but for the other guys on the call, if you want to stay on for a second, we'll just do a quick discussion on the talk, listen to your thoughts on it. But yeah, Anand, thank you so much for joining today. It's been great.
Thanks, everyone. Hope you enjoyed it. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.